Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are getting into our quarterback tiers review. Look at this week, right? We changed the format a little bit. And so instead of doing start sit, we're going to look at, guys at the end of QB1 territory, guys in the middle to end of QB2 territory. Talk about these guys as starts, as possible sits, as tough matchups, who we'd play, how we'd rank these guys. So without further ado, let's get into our first guy that we want to talk about in the QB1 range, and that is Jordan Love. So Love is coming off he had back-to-back weeks where he didn't throw any touchdowns, so he has not been good basically for a month. And now he gets Chicago, who is looked at, right, as a very good pass defense. But now, they've kind of got the last couple weeks, and it just like the effort, the energy within the team. Like there's supposedly guys calling for Williams to be benched. They fired their offensive coordinator. There's just a lot of turmoil there. And so the effort just doesn't seem to be on as high of a level. And so I'm very much more confident starting Jordan Love in this tough matchup coming off bye. It's a division opponent. Obviously, the Packers are very good against Chicago. So I do think overall that Jordan Love is somebody that in that range that I'm a little bit more confident starting than I otherwise would be. And you'll see him ranked lower because of the matchup. We got some teams and players that have good matchups, but I think I'd still be playing him over like a Bo Nix, for example, who you'll see ahead of him. I'd be playing him ahead of CJ Stroud, who is getting Nico back, but we still don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I do hope that Love is going to be very good, going to get back to throwing touchdowns. All of his weapons should be back, right? Maybe he hits a deep one to Watson in this game, and Dobbs looking good out of bye. They've had plenty of time to prep for this matchup. And so Love is definitely somebody that even in a 1 QB league, I'd be getting into my lineups, but in 2 QB leagues, I'd feel very confident about starting.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Bears because on the season, they've only allowed 10.4 points per game to opposing quarterbacks. However, over the last 4 weeks, like you mentioned, they've been averaging 14.7 fantasy points per game. So 4 points more per game over the last month. The wheels are falling off. It will be interesting to see how they play on the other side of the ball too, because a lot of times when there's, an unpopular coach and a change is made, the team comes out inspired, which I think would only elevate Jordan Love's game even more if Chicago does put up a good fight. So yeah, I do like Love in this one. He has been super inconsistent, like you mentioned. He's been injured, but no doubting the talent, no doubting the weapons.
Moving on to the second guy that we want to talk about, somebody that I have ranked behind Love for this week is Patrick Mahomes going up against Buffalo.
Yeah, so this is where we differ. I actually have Mahomes at the higher end of this tier. Mahomes through the first 7 weeks had not finished below 12 fantasy points or higher than 17. Since then, he scored 18, 24, and 17 fantasy points. So not exactly lighting the world on fire, but he is back into QB1 consideration, and now he's QB 14 on the season. But I will say the last 2 weeks, he's thrown it 44 and 42 times, which are the highest marks of the season. This week, he goes on the road against the Bills. The Bills have been stingy against the pass. They've only allowed 13 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, which is pretty much identical to what they've been on the regular season. The reason I want to start Mahomes is kind of twofold. Like the floor I feel confident in. Like I do feel more confident in Mahomes' floor than Jordan Love's. But at the same time, this one feels like a playoff game, right? The Chiefs are actually 2.5-point underdogs in this game. So I'm just riding the great player in a huge spot. And so that's why I've got Mahomes the highest in this tier.
Yeah, and I could get behind Mahomes, right? Obviously he's been looking much better. I didn't look, but I'm not sure if Juju is going to be back in this game because that could also give him an additional weapon that, maybe isn't the greatest output from a fantasy perspective, but can, help move the chains, keep them on the field. I hope moving forward he continues to be better. Like you mentioned, Buffalo's been pretty tough matchup, and Hopkins did great against Tampa Bay, but we kind of warned about that one. Like, look, this is Tampa Bay, and then he went out. He had that one catch like right at the end of the game that kind of helped them, take the lead. But other than that, Hopkins didn't really do much again last week. So we'll see if he kind of gets it going against Buffalo, or if they are really able to kind of suffocate him in the offense, make it go through somebody else, and we'll see if Mahomes can kind of make that work. I do like the comment on volume too. If Mahomes is going to throw this much, he's going to be significantly more valuable in fantasy. Moving over to our last QB1 here, the guy that I have last of the tier, but that I'm very much more encouraged about, and I actually have back in this tier moving forward, is CJ Stroud. He's getting Nico Collins back this week, and that is going to be huge. On top of the fact that they're playing Dallas, which is also huge because Dallas is awful, and they're not going to be able to move the ball on Houston at all if Cooper Rush has anything to say about it. So I do think Stroud, they should have the ball a ton. Mixon should keep the chains moving. And I'm hoping for multiple scores here in this game against Dallas with his number one weapon back. Stroud over the last 4 weeks only has 2 touchdowns. We've been constantly telling you to sit him. And that's kind of corresponded directly with no Nico Collins and no Stephon Diggs. So getting one of those guys back is going to be huge for his value.
Yeah, I hope that the Texans roll up the score on the Cowboys and just kind of stick it to them. And Nico's such a game changer. I mean, I think he's maybe the most underrated player in the NFL. I will say my only fear.
Do you think that even still? Nico's been pretty good, dude. I don't know that anybody's sleeping on Nico anymore.
I don't want to say sleeping on, but it's 12, like
15. Yeah.
It's just like, is he a top 5 or is he a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I feel too. But I'm not sure.
You think anybody's sleeping on that? You don't think that's consensus opinion?
I guess sleeping in a sense that no one thinks that he's not good, but I still think in terms of like the star power of those other guys that their name brand brings, I don't think that Nico's quite in that tier, and I think he should be.
Yeah, somebody might still think that Devontae Adams is better than him or something. You know?
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, can we move on? Can we turn the page here, please? Like we can recognize Adams is awesome while also recognizing that he's not Nico Collins at this point.
I guess my fear with this one is like if they just get up early and Mixon, it's just the Joe Mixon show. But I think they're going to let him throw it at Nico quite a bit. But
I think Stroud has been struggling so much that score is no object in this game. I think if they can throw it, they're going to. And if Nico gets deep, they're looking for him. I think Nico might rack 150 air yards in this game and just be playing out of his mind. So I hope that he does and that Stroud has a good week.
I hope so too, because I had him in my starting lineups, last week, and then I had to flex him out onto IR and start Demarcus Robinson in a league, which wasn't fun because I was kind of constrained by the whole Sunday night thing. So I hope you're right on this one, because Dallas against opposing quarterbacks the last 4 weeks have given up 24 fantasy points per game. They're just kind of a laughing stock at this point.
Awful. They're awful, and their season's over. I think the earlier they realize that, the earlier they give Trey Lance a chance to start and a look. And they get to look at what he has, I think the better for the franchise. But, they might still have this, diluted opinion that they still are in it, but they're not. So moving down to our QB2s here. The first guy that we want to talk about here is Justin Herbert going up against the Bengals. We finally are seeing him maybe ranked as a QB1, but since he's been down in the dumps for so long, down in the QB range for so long, we're going to talk about it in that context.
Yeah, and once again, he was great last week. He didn't have to do a whole lot. He completed 14 of his 18 pass attempts for 164 yards and a touchdown. He did kind of get bailed out fantasy-wise with 32 rush yards and a score on the ground, which ended up racking him up 19 points. But he gets the Bengals this week, who offer an excellent combination of a great offense and a gettable defense. I know their defense has improved, but on the season, they're still giving up quite a few points to opposing quarterbacks, and Herbert's just an elite player who's on top of his game right now. He's only thrown 1 interception on the year, so I think this is a game where they're going to have to lean on him even more. And with the way that this offense is looking under the new system, I really like Herbert this week.
Yeah, I mean, he's so good. The Chargers need this game. This is such an important game for them playoff positioning wise, because when we come down to it, the Chargers have a really tough schedule over the next 4 weeks, right? They get Cincinnati, Baltimore, Atlanta, and Kansas City. If they can win this first game, they can lose all 3 of those games and be, 7-6 and still have the tiebreaker on the Bengals, who are the team that might be closest to that in a month. And that would be huge for them for the playoffs too. So I think they're going to be ready to play. I think Herbert is going to be the main game plan here. They should be planning for him to throw it all over the yard. I hope he gets up over 30 pass attempts. And if he does, he is going to smash in this spot. So I'm very excited about Justin Herbert as well. And obviously you can tell my Charger fan is coming out and hoping that they can get to 7-3, because that kind of sets up their season, man. If they win this game, it just really will solidify them in their playoff positioning, assuming that they can finish strong at the end of the year.
And it's funny, just a quick side note. Our buddy Kenny, who was on a couple shows earlier in the off season, he's a big Niners fan, and he looked me dead in the eye and he said, Jim Harbaugh is going to win you guys 12 games this year. And I said, no, he's not. No, he's not. I'm tempering expectations. He's like, I've seen this before and I want you to trust me. And I called him crazy. And I don't know if they're going to get there, but they look really good. And I'm so happy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so happy. I think it's an interesting comment on 12 wins, because if they beat Cincinnati and they're able to beat Atlanta, then the rest of their last 4 games are all winnable games, like Tampa Bay and Raiders, Denver in there. Like they have 4 winnable games at the very end of the schedule. So if they go 2-2 over the next 4, I think they can get to 12 wins if they win out. So it'll be very interesting to see how they look against Cincinnati. This is going to be their first major test in like a month and a half, because they had 5 really easy games. They barely lost to Arizona on a last-second field goal because they kicked 5 field goals themselves. That was like a weird game. That was on ESPN Plus on Monday night. Had the lowest Monday night viewership like ever, because there was a paywall to watch it. It wasn't on YouTube TV. Like whoever thought that was a good idea should be fired. But the thought is that the Chargers could still get to 12 wins, and that's not going to get them the division, unfortunately, since they are with the Chiefs in that same division, but it will give them a lot of confidence if they get up to 11 or 12 wins in that 5 seed in the AFC. I think that should be good enough to get them the 5 seed if they get that many wins. Moving over to the second quarterback that we want to talk about here is Jameis Winston. He's coming off bye, going up against the Saints. So this is a little bit of a revenge game here for him, maybe. I don't know if he feels revenge or if he feels too grateful or how he feels towards the Orleans, but that is his former team. And I do think that the Saints defense is terrible. I know that they just shut down Kirk Cousins and the Falcons, and I think that was very surprising that they weren't able to get anything going through the air against the Saints team who had just lost Lattimore to a trade. I think that's more of an outlier than a pattern. So I'm going to just go right back to Winston here. I think this is a great matchup. I think he can throw multiple scores. And I think that this is a game where they should have to continue to score, because New Orleans' offense looked pretty good with MVS and Kamara last week. So, and Taysom Hill got involved. Like maybe they are starting to put together something that they can actually be viable, versus how it was looking that they were literally losing all their weapons and, like hard to move the ball. But Carr seemed to still be able to do his thing, put up 20 on the Falcons. So, if they put up 20 on the Browns here, maybe the Browns get to 27, 30 points or something like that, and Winston will be a big part of that if they do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in Cousins' defense, like he still threw for 300 yards against them. They just, obviously it was the Bijan show this last week, so they are just so gettable everywhere. It's kind of like pick your poison, but kind of like what we talked about with the Chicago Bears, we saw it play out last week with the Saints, right? They get rid of their coach, they play inspired, they win a game that we're not expecting them to. I just don't know how this game is going to go. Like on one hand, I can see Jameis, like you mentioned, the revenge game. The Saints are still inspired, rack up a bunch of scores, or it's just like kind of an ugly matchup. So that's kind of why I have him third in this tier, just because I am a little bit hesitant about how it's actually going to play out.
So since you just got him off the waiver wire, there's a chance that you don't need him, but maybe you have somebody on bye this week too, right? There's a lot of teams on bye in week 11, and he's going to be your starter. So this video could just serve as a little bit of confirmation bias against a good matchup where he can kind of go off. So I know I have him in a league where I'm starting him in a 12-team Superflex league. So I expect big things from Winston this week. Moving on to our last QB2 guy that we want to talk about here is Geno Smith going up against SF. And he's one that's like kind of been a QB1, but was drafted as a QB2. And like maybe he's more of a QB2. So he's kind of on that border, and he gets a very difficult matchup here with the 49ers. So he will be a QB2 this week. But since he's been so good, I want to give you a chance to talk about Geno Smith.
Yeah, Geno's tricky, right? Like he's QB 10 on the season. He's put up the 4th most passing yards in the NFL. The 3 guys ahead of him have all had their buys too. So I know he held that mark for quite some time. But hopefully he gets DK Metcalf back this week, which would be a big boost, obviously, for the offense as a whole. What scares me a little bit this week against the 49ers is we've seen them at full strength against San Francisco in week 6, and that was at home. DK had 11 targets in that game, but only caught 3 of them. Geno threw it 52 times for 312 yards, but only managed 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions. It was a 12-point fantasy performance when it was all said and done. Niners are a 6.5-point home favorite. It is a very high over-under this week. So my fear is if they get on their heels and he turns it over a couple times, it could get ugly. But we know that the volume is going to be there, and we know that he obviously has talented receivers. So that's why I've got him second in this tier, just ahead of Winston. But I'm cautiously optimistic this week about Geno.
Yeah, and it's hard not to be optimistic. He's getting his number one weapon back. He just saw Jackson Smith and Jigba go off in the most recent game, right? So it's like maybe Geno's weapons are even like getting healthy on one side, improving on the other. And we could see some fireworks here in what could be a high scoring game too. I mean, it's something where if they're chasing points against the Niners, that they're going to be looking good. So
I think they will be.
And I still can't believe Geno's like start to the year. It was like his first 8 games, he had exactly 1 touchdown passing each game. It was like no boom weeks, but he just kept rolling with high yardages and 1 touchdown, and like that kept him in the top 10 amongst quarterbacks, the whole time. So it's like funny to look. He finally had 2, 0, and 3 over the last 3 weeks going into the bye. But I think moving forward, I think more touchdowns, maybe a little less yardage could be the expectation here. But the offense seems to be rolling, so I think it's a good call to call him out, add some confidence to him, even in a tough matchup against the Niners. The last guy we want to talk about here, this is more of a sleeper alert type of guy, Will Levis, right? So he came out against the Chargers and he looked good, right? I mean, he only threw 23 times. He had 18 completions, 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was finding Ridley all over the field. It was kind of just locked in on him, really, for most of that production. And he had a couple scrambles, racked up 40 rushing yards. So I think there might be something here with Levis. We did talk about him in the trade targets video yesterday for Superflex leagues that, he's got a really good schedule rest of season. So, going up against Minnesota in this one, they'll be chasing points. Minnesota's defense has been gettable through the air a little bit more recently. I know they did just shut down Flacco, but I think Minnesota is a team that Will Levis should be able to move the ball on. He's going to see an increased volume. So hopefully if he maintains some level of efficiency and can complete some passes early, maybe he gets it rolling against them as well and can have a solid day here against Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, he might just be kind of a garbage time hero the rest of the season. Like I'm looking at his schedule right now, like you mentioned. After this week, he's got Houston, Washington, then he gets Jacksonville, Cincy, Indy, and Jacksonville. So he's got Jacksonville week 17. So I guess my point is, if you are in a super flex league or a 10 team, he might be on the waiver wire. And if you're hurting a quarterback, he's definitely someone I would be targeting, because if he continues to improve with that schedule, like I think it's worth taking a shot on.
Yeah, definitely. Throw him on your team, see how it goes. And even this week, if you're really in a pinch with bye weeks, right? Like you've been leaning on Baker and you just didn't have a second quarterback or a third quarterback on your bench, he's available. I think you'd do worse than him this week in terms of just if you're able to scoop him and start him, or make a small time trade for somebody on your bench for him. I think that's all reasonable for this week, and something that I think can possibly elevate your floor a little bit if you're hurting bye week wise. So wanted to bring him up as a sleeper for this week. And with that, thank you so much for watching. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Later.